Pokémon! I think this is especially the time that I should talk about something that does worry me about the Pokémon franchise, especially with the introduction of Gen 9 already having come and gone. And that, my friends, is the art and design direction of the series. To clear something up, no, I am not referring to graphics when I talk about artistic design. There is a difference between artistic design and graphics, it's just that two coincide with each other a lot and are necessary cogs in the machine that make up how a game looks. The only difference, in my opinion, is that artistic design can make up for the visual shortcomings that graphics can have on a game. That and the fact I've gotten so tired of hearing people complain about the graphics again and again and again and again and That isn't to say graphics aren't important, but I'd rather take a game that can use its limited graphics in creative artistic ways than have the prettiest amount of pixels on a screen and various textures. And unfortunately I have to say that Pokemon really isn't doing it for me. For the purposes of this video, I'll be breaking this up into three sections of art design: the world, the Pokemon, and the humans. And I should point out that I do have experience in artistic design. Hell, I got a degree in that sort of thing. So trust me when I say I think I know what I'm talking about. But in any case, each of these topics have both pros and cons to them that I'll be bringing up, but if the title didn't give it away, there's more cons in my opinion than pros. So, let's begin. The world of Pokémon! It's certainly an interesting one, wouldn't you say? Not only do you have a more technologically advanced society that has effectively perfected teleportation and minimization of large living creatures, but you've also got a society that is seemingly able to have dealt with the concept of poverty, hunger, and even war. Even if it's to the detriment of the narratives that Pokemon has been writing for the past few generations.
This world is imperfect.
What?
If only I could wipe away the impurities.
Is anybody else listening to
And
this?
make it as beautiful as...
My point is, it's a world that can have a lot of potential for creative locations and set pieces, but Pokemon has an odd mixture that leads to some sort of disconnect to me. This is mostly due to the fact that Pokemon's world has a basis in our own. You've heard it before from several other YouTubers that the first 4 generations all had reasons that were based on Japan, Gen 5 was based on New York and America, Gen 6 was based on France, and yada yada yada, you get it. You've heard this before from multiple people, and it's something I don't have an issue with most of the time, especially when you consider that a lot of Pokemon's elements come from the Earthbound series.
でマザー2が終わってさあ本格的にポケモンを作り始めましょうっていうことになったんですけど僕は
Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't a slam against the particular design elements, but to me, I think Pokemon's world design is strongest when it really breaks away from the mundanity of our world. I'm probably gonna get crucified because I dare to praise Sword and Shield, but from an artistic and design sense, it had some extremely polished location designs, and sometimes it would work and sometimes it wouldn't. Take for example, Ballanlay. A town with giant mushrooms where everything had this neon coloring to it that made the town really memorable in design aspect. Hell, give me an entire forest route that has those giant mushrooms. And yes, I'm aware of Glimwood Tangle, but in comparison to Bellona, it doesn't really scratch that itch.
Could use some mushroom.
Or Spikemuth. While I have a lot of issues with the game design of that town, where it basically is just a glorified hallway, the dim atmosphere and neon lights is probably one of the most unique places in a Pokemon game in my memory, especially if we're talking about towns and locations. Pokemon Legends Arceus, while a mixed bag, had a few fun locations, but none that I would really consider all that fleshed out or memorable. And I know that I said in my review of the game that there would still be issues with the locations pertaining to Sinnoh since Hisui is an older version of it, but I still think there should have been a lot more memorable locations being made for that regard. Really, the only place that sticks out to me is the volcano, and I'm being generous with that. Basically, what I'm getting at is that Pokemon, while on a new kind of system and having gone to 3D, should take advantage of world design. In fact, I'd even argue that world design can make up for a lot of the texture and mediocre graphics that Pokemon has been having as of late. You'd be surprised how well that works. While I wouldn't be as annoying as the people claiming whenever they look at Legends graphics, they could be much better or implemented a lot better with a good artistic design. And when we gotta look at Scarlet and Violet's world in the latest trailers, I gotta say I'm kinda disappointed with it, since it comes off a bit generic. And I'm going to be clear here. Yes, I am jumping the gun. And yes, I know I shouldn't. But at this point, I'm only able to go off what we have on the trailer and Pokemon's previous works to come to my conclusions and worries for this future title. Like, being when you got something with beautiful locations like Anastar City and Kalos, it's just window dressing. Maybe the world should be more interactive with the player in a unique setting. Like, I actually want to go down more than just one alleyway in Spikemuth, for crying out loud. I like all 3 starters for Scarlet and Violet. I think they're probably really strong in design-wise. Not only do we have 3 different kinds of animals with a bird, mammal, and reptile, kinda reminds me of Gen 3, but they each have their own unique quirks and unique body structures. Granted, there's one more thing, a conversation that always comes up. Will these starters become humanoid or remain bestial? Now, shock of all shocks, I don't really care about that sort of argument. Again, it comes to personal taste and preferences. I will say that I really hate that "I could see this in the wild" argument. Not because I don't see where people are coming from, but using it as an objective marker to criticize a character design doesn't seem all that fair to me. Even more so for creature designs too. They're monsters. They are supposed to be not so natural to the world. There's nothing wrong with personalized criticism and preferences, but doing that doesn't really provide any strong understanding for designers. Besides, apparently seeing a giant turtle with cannons popping out of its shell is perfectly natural, but a rabbit that kicks stones around like a soccer ball? Pfft, that's too much! Obviously, I am being hyperbolic for the sake of entertainment, because some geniuses out there have the inability to detect sarcasm. But I find the immersion and realism arguments to be really fundamentally flawed. There are a ton of Pokemon that fall under a class or job of sorts. Like, you'll have people say that Pokemon like Delphox and Greninja have specific roles to them that dictate their personality simply because they are based off the Mage and Ninja class from RPGs. When, no, they don't. The job of a Pokemon doesn't exactly assign its personality completely. It just says its skill sets and abilities, not a personality. And as an artist and character designer myself, saying, "I can't see a sad Cinderace," or "a goofy Incineroar," I do not see that as much of a dictation of personality as an argument. That isn't to say that design can influence a personality, but it's not the be-all and end-all of it. In addition, the immersion and seeing in the wild is something that I've already said I do understand, but I disagree with, since it's a very subjective stance. I can agree it's hard to see a pack of Incineroar or a group of Inteleon, but it's not impossible, especially when you consider things like pack leaders and alphas. Not the Pokemon Legends alphas, I'm talking animalistic dominance hierarchy alphas. I could totally see an Incineroar being the alpha protecting the younger Litten in the wild, or a Bob of Primarina sitting on the stones singing in the wild. All it takes is a little twist and turn, and this argument can easily be flipped on its head because of how subjective it is, as well as how versed you are in not only fantasy lore, but animal behaviors. Again, this is just my perspective, and what I'm saying is in fact just my grievances with how some people take their critiques and how you can easily twist their logic against them. Saying creature design over character design is something that I understand, but I just don't agree that either philosophy is better than the other, especially when technically you can have both. Also, I'd like to say that I think starters should be allowed to be more fantastical, especially in their final designs, aka final evolutions, since you can't actually catch them in the wild, so they're supposed to be more special. Hell, I'd even argue that they're somewhat a rarity too because of that. Kinda breaks the immersion of them being part of an ecosystem when you can't even find them in said ecosystem. But that doesn't change the fact there has been a drastic shift in Pokemon design, most notably in the starters. You can see this if you look at all the currently available starters, and how slowly but surely, the Pokemon heads have slightly gotten bigger and rounder than their main body, and the limbs have gotten thinner. This isn't a bad thing. I personally adore the Scorbunny line, but this does mark a significant change to the overall design elements to the Pokemon themselves. You can even see this element in latest starters, most notably Sprigatito and Quaxly. Fuecoco was a little better in that regard with his bulkier body, but my observations are still being laid there, so I want to wait till the next evolution lines before I say anything else about that. I'd also say that the eyes are a little different between generations, but that's more or less a commonality between all Pokemon and generations, and I chalk it up more to the fact that more triangular eyes were actually made as a constraint with the technology at the time, since on the Game Boy, making rounder eyes would have taken more pixels to make them. You see, there's a reason why the designs of Pokemon were a lot more simplistic back in the day, and it was due to technological constraints. Low-res sprite work would often involve characters with more thick proportions because long, slender limbs don't translate with limited number of pixels on a screen. Now that the games are in a more free environment, the designs can be a bit more loose. Whether you like the simplistic designs or the more elaborate ones, that's up to you. Personally speaking, I find the design work has been streamlined and slowly moving away from a more stout and semi-realistic approach to the more animalistic Pokemon into a more geometric design philosophy. Which isn't a bad thing. Character designs are meant to make sure that the audience don't forget what a character looks like. And the shape language is a key and a common technique to develop characters. It's used to inform you about a character's story, setting, mood, or even personality. And like I said earlier, just because a Pokemon design has a personality assigned with it, that doesn't mean it'll dictate what your Pokemon's gonna act like. It's just the standard design for a Pokemon. Imagine if they made a specific version of a design for each of the 24 natures that a Pokemon can have. You'd be looking over at 21,000 unique designs. Ugh. Now, you may be wondering, "Kamen, what does that have to do with the expectations with design work?" Well, I'm mainly pointing out a few key factors here before I get into that. The first is that I'm establishing that I don't mind if Pokemon have more personality-centered designs, nor do I find it to be bad if they have more anthropomorphic traits to them. You can see from my point of view that while there has been a drastic change in Pokemon design philosophy, I do not see that as a major problem. No, what my problem is with all the fan interpretations of the starters will be, and how just I'm waiting for the inevitable complaining and comparisons to fan interpretations. Ugh. Oh my Arceus, I am just dreading the oncoming leaks that show the low-definition models of new Pokemon. I remember back when people were shitting on Typhlosion for Arceus, but the moment they saw those purple flames around his neck, my boy! Like, I totally get that a lot of people prefer wild, animalistic designs. Hey, it's like I turned the situation back into it. But just because you or I dislike a design, that doesn't mean it's a bad design. Now by that same token, just because you like a design, that doesn't mean the design is great. That applies to me too. To bring this back to Gen 9, I really do like the designs of the revealed Pokemon, and they do hold a lot of potential. Really, my issue with the starters is the repeated animal motifs. Like, we've already got a cat and a gator in previous generations, but that's not a death sentence for design work. I'm just more curious if the designs will be more basic and generic, or if they won't take influence from the region that the game is going to be in. To me, I think a starter Pokemon should definitely have a design personality, and not only should the Pokemon's body grow and evolve, it should also evolve its design personality as well. So long as they have that, I'll be happy. Alright, let's talk about the big issue, the human designs. I made it clear in my rant about Generation 9 that I did not care for the human designs of the protagonists. And not just because we're apparently going even younger in this generation than in previous ones, although that is an issue for me because I kind of wish Game Freak would at the very least keep the tween-teen design models that they've been doing for the past few generations. Sure, there's an obvious artistic design change that was slowly changing over the generations of Pokemon, but there was still this exaggerated anime-esque design. Even if Milo's face in Sword and Shield was the stuff of nightmares and his head looks like it was made for a kid and plopped onto his body. But these new character designs, there's too much of a realistic vibe going on. Like, on their own, for what their concept is, it works and the outfits do fit the school concept perfectly. However, the art style just doesn't fit for Pokemon in my opinion. Especially considering that when you look at Legends character designs, it still fits with the overall design work of the series, and you still had some very over-the-top designs for the characters as well. Which is something that I've kind of had issue with as the characters slowly became more and more down to earth in the past few generations. I think it has to do with their eyes. They're too circular and not oval-shaped like a lot of the other Pokemon character designs have to them. It looks more like a Pokemon spin-off design than an actual mainline game. Not that I'm saying that the designs are bad, but I'm worried we're going to get a lot more generic character designs for the more notable NPCs of it. If you look at, say, Red's design throughout the years, while it's obviously gone through a lot of artistic changes and styles, it still feels like Pokemon since there's still elements that are consistent and even the eyes still have the same feel to them. It reminds me of the simplistic art style change that happened with Yu-Gi-Oh! 7s. And this is all a preference, but it really irks me that there's such a weird change in character design for the characters. I am not against change. Hell, I'd argue that my favorite Pokemon protagonist, Wes, breaks a lot of the Pokemon protag character design traditions, especially the eyes. But to me, the difference between Wes and these new designs is that Wes has a much more of a risky design change, and he was still in a spin-off title. So people would be more willing to accept a change in art style and design. I'm probably being way too pedantic and nitpicky, but I prefer to have a much older character. I'm not saying they need to be in their 20s, but being in their tweens is a lot more approachable character concept. Not only because the characters actually have more life experience, but it makes it more interesting for characters to go through things and invite character conflict. I also think it has to do with personality. Maybe it's how they're drawn in their concept art, which you can give personality to a design depending on how you draw the character, but this makes it hard to really see a personality with the characters. Something that previous Pokemon concept art has actually managed to do, especially with the main protagonists. I don't know, this is probably just a me problem that I'm blowing out of proportion. But what do you guys think? Let me know your thoughts about the design works of the Pokemon games down below. I'm MangaKamen, and thanks for listening to me rant. Have a nice day.